Most fighters talk about confidence. Moses Itauma, he lives it. The question is whether that mindset makes him special or dangerous. He does not look intimidated. He does not hesitate. And that belief could be the most frightening thing about him. Now, Moses Itauma is rising fast. Every fight brings more attention. Every performance, it raises expectations. But his biggest weapon may not be his power. It may be his mindset. Itauma does not seem afraid of the challenge ahead. He respects opponents. He just refuses to fear them. So let's explore some statements and also explore the fear theme. So the first statement is that Moses Itauma believes confidence is essential at the elite level. I think this premise is accurate. This premise is accurate. But there perhaps is a caveat. Confidence is essential, but overconfidence is dangerous, very dangerous. Perhaps Lennox Lewis was overconfident when he fought Hasim Rahman. Perhaps Buster Douglas, or perhaps Mike Tyson was overconfident when he fought Buster Douglas. So confidence is essential to compete at the elite level, but overconfidence, so if you've got confidence here, lack of confidence, but then you've got overconfidence can put you in dangerous territory. And I think it's important that Moses Itauma understands that premise. And then the second statement is that fear and respect for an opponent are not the same thing. There are two phases to this statement. Phase 1 is fear. Phase 2 is respect. So let's break it down. Fear is the emotional response, a perceived threat. Respect is recognizing and valuing abilities and skills. Let's give some context to this. People feared Mike Tyson. They feared him. They had that emotional reaction. But they also respected Mike Tyson because they respected his skill set. People feared Sonny Liston. Sonny Liston was a terrifying champion. He really was in his time. But they also respected him. They respected his skills, what he does in the boxing ring. People feared George Foreman. And when I'm talking about George Foreman, I'm talking about the first career of George Foreman, the George Foreman that knocked out Joe Frazier and Ken Norton. People feared George Foreman, but they would have also respected him as a boxer. So you have the fear and respect, and I'm assuming within the Filip Hgovich context, within the Moses Itauma, Filip Hgovich context, you would have a respect for Filip Hgovich, but maybe not a fear of him as a boxer, but perhaps a fear of losing. And that's an important distinction. You don't fear the man, but you may respect his value. You may respect the jab, respect the footwork, respect the backhand, respect the left hook to the body, but you don't fear him. But you could still fear the concept of losing. Many people may not understand that distinction between fear and respect, but I think it's an important one. Again, when you think of the Mike Tyson and the Sonny Liston, you think of fear and respect. I sense that when Riddick Bowe fought Evander Holyfield, he didn't fear Evander Holyfield, but he respected his boxing skills very highly. Vice versa, Evander Holyfield wouldn't have feared Riddick Bowe, but he would have respected Riddick Bowe as an elite operator. So it's very important to make those distinctions. And I think Moses Itauma doesn't fear Filip Hgovich, but he respects him, and vice versa. Now the next statement is Itauma sees Hgovich's fight. He sees the Hgovich fight as a major step in his career. It is a major step indeed, because what happens if he loses? Well, the key to the door for titles and money gets reduced substantially, but it's not potentially the biggest step, because the biggest step would be winning a world title or unifying a world title or fighting one of the biggest names, but it's still a big step, and it's a necessary step to those bigger steps. The next statement is that young fighters face intense scrutiny from fans and media. I think this is so true. And I think sometimes scrutiny, depending on how you define it, sometimes it's justified, but sometimes it's not justified. For example, boxers are mortal, but it seems that not all boxers are judged from mortal standards. some people judge boxers in such harsh conditions, like they might say something like he hasn't fought anyone. But any boxer that's fought on British level, on Commonwealth level, and at contender level has fought good opposition, but they won't acknowledge that. They will only acknowledge an elite opponent. And it just seems that the standard of how they judge people can be very, very unfair, can be very unbalanced. So I think today's standards of judging boxers is very harsh. Maybe though, it's always been harsh. Maybe it was harsher back then, I'm not sure. But it seems particularly harsh now. So the next statement is that mental strength is as important as physical ability in boxing. So you have mental strength, but also physical ability. And the premise here is that both are important, but mental strength is as important. Some may say it's even more important. Clearly, mental strength is so important to a boxer, and it's the unseen thing to a boxer. A good example of this is Evander Holyfield. When he fought Riddick Bowe in the first fight, how he overcame that 10th round was symbolic to his mental strength. Beating Bowe in the rematch, again, was symbolic to his mental strength. Beating Quarry in that 15-round war at cruiserweight was symbolic of his extreme mental strength. And beating Mike Tyson, again, was symbolic of his mental strength in various ways. And also you have other fighters like Rocky Marciano, who had such bravery and courage and amazing mental strength. And before Rocky Marciano, who was unbeaten, before he would land what they would call the Suzy Q, he would often have taken loads of punches, would be cut, but he would always persevere. He would always find a way to win. That is mental strength. And in both cases, that mental strength was built, I believe, in camps and also through life experiences, but predominantly in the camp, because both of those fighters were elite. They trained at an elite level. So mental strength is essential. It appears that Moses Itauma has good mental strength, but that will be tested or could be tested in this fight, and it would be definitely will be tested in his future. And that's a question mark in terms of not if Moses Itauma has mental strength, but how much, how tough is he mentally? Because that could be a significant factor in his growth. Now, the next part the next statement is taking difficult fights can accelerate a fighter's development. I think the premise to that is true, but it can also destroy a boxer. It's important to acknowledge here that matchmaking is an art. Matchmaking is an art, and when it's not done effectively, it can destroy a whole boxer's career. David Haye's career was nearly destroyed when he fought Carl Thompson, but he had a good team behind him and he was able to rebuild. But that loss to Carl Thompson, I believe it was Carl Thompson, that could have been catastrophic. But David Haye was mentally strong. He was able to rebuild, not just mentally, but strategically. He was able to come back, be champion, cruiserweight champion, and heavyweight champion. Also, when I think of matchmaking, I think of the Joe Calzaghe-Eubanks Sr. fight. That was a very dangerous fight for Joe Calzaghe, not just because of Eubanks Sr.'s ability, but because of his experience. So matchmaking, when done effectively, it can fast-track a fighter. When done in a non-effective manner, it can destroy a fighter. I think that's really important to acknowledge, that it's a skill, it's an art. And then the last comment is that self-belief is a common trait among future champions. Let's explore that. Muhammad Ali, Foreman, Terence Crawford, Sugar Ray Leonard, Sugar Ray Robinson, Andre Ward, Evander Holyfield, Naoya Inoue, Larry Holmes. What do they all have in common? From my perspective as an outsider looking in, they all have self-belief. Of course, some people's level of self-belief will be different. Some will be a 9, some will be a 10, but they have a level of self-belief. They believe they're the best, and self-belief is so essential. It's a part of the championship toolkit. Can you become a champion or even a contender if you don't have a significant amount of self-belief? It's a good question. But let's now get back to the point, the initial point, the packaging of the video, which is fear. And I think it's important to recognize that when we talk about fear, it's how you manage it. Of course, we've established that there's a difference between respect and fearing your opponent. You can respect your opponent, but not fear your opponent, but still fear losing. But when we talk about fear, there's an important distinction to make here. And finally, I think that distinction is this. Because you need to put yourself in a position where you can manage fear. Because if you don't manage fear, eventually, fear will manage you. So that's the end of the video. Now I'm trying to build a digital boxing community. That means I'm interested in your comments, I'm interested in your questions, and I'm interested in your observations. Now, if you want to support the channel, simply like and subscribe and click the hype button. And if you want to watch more content like this, then simply click here or click here. As always, thanks for your time. It is much appreciated.